Welcome to week 6. Can you believe it's week 6 already? We are very close to the end of our journey that took us through the different islands of the NAP process. We have arrived at our final destination for this course, the Monitoring and Evaluation Island. This island is about designing M&E frameworks, defining specific indicators, evaluating impact, and building more effective communication strategies required to execute a NAP. Let's begin. Monitoring and evaluation, or M&E frameworks, help us track and assess whether activities and policies are achieving desired goals and objectives. Monitoring is an ongoing process which involves collection of data that informs day-to-day management and decisions. Evaluation is a comprehensive assessment of completed or ongoing activities. It helps determine the extent to which activities are achieving stated objectives or are having an impact. As you remember from week 4, adaptation options for agriculture are quite diverse. As a result, M&E frameworks can also differ based on the adaptation outcomes that we want to measure or the set of projects and policies we are focusing on. M&E can track changes in vulnerability to climate change or progress of adaptation processes and policy implementation. While the overall aim of M&E is to help learn from the experiences on adaptation, M&E frameworks can also be extremely useful as a mechanism for accountability and justification for adaptation funding. In the context of the NAP, our map, the technical guidelines, suggests that an M&E system should be set up from the onset of the process. A NAP M&E system can then provide a means for countries to track national progress towards adaptation targets and national development goals. When setting up an M&E system for the NAP of the agricultural sectors, an important step is defining its goal, purpose, and focus. Here, you have to consider how adaptation goals tie into other national development goals and the ongoing country-level reporting to major international mechanisms such as the Paris Agreement or Agenda 2030. These mechanisms already include sets of indicators that are also relevant for adaptation efforts. In fact, selecting indicators is an important step in setting up M&E frameworks. Indicators are the variables we choose to measure a phenomena of interest, in our case, adaptation planning. They can measure processes or specific outcomes and should be both process and outcome-based. This can help governments and policymakers to observe the connection between adaptation policies and outcomes. Now, there are many factors to consider when choosing indicators. Here are 4 of them. 1. Data availability. Data should be collected from various sources to avoid unnecessary burden on data collection and reporting on one entity. 2. Local context. Since adaptation is first and foremost a local issue, adaptation indicators need to capture changes at local levels. This means measuring bottom-up adaptation processes and capturing existing local adaptation initiatives. 3. Stakeholder participation. As with many of the NAP-related activities and processes you have seen, the development of the M&E framework and the selection of indicators should also be participatory. Remember from week 4 that stakeholder engagement should take place throughout the project and planning cycle. This is also the case for M&E. 4. Gender perspectives. Finally, as adaptation planning needs to be gender sensitive, adaptation indicators also need to capture gender perspectives. We will be covering this in a bit more detail in a few minutes. So, in M&E specifically for agriculture outcome, what are the different types of indicators? Once again, we have 4 broad categories for you. First, natural resources indicators. These evaluate the relationship between the state of the environment and the agricultural sector activities. Second, Indicators for agriculture production. These monitor the relationship between natural resources, agricultural production, and climate change impacts. Third, socioeconomic indicators. These look at the relationship between climate change adaptation and social and economic development. They capture the access to basic services, support for livelihoods opportunities, and social protection of the agricultural population. Fourth, indicators for institutions and policy. These evaluate the existence and effectiveness of institutional frameworks and policies. Okay, it's time for us to zoom in our telescope and focus on one set of indicators to get a clearer view of how this works. Let's go back to capturing gender perspectives. Involving women and men in a participatory, gender-sensitive development of indicators is key. This can be a highly effective and meaningful process in terms of monitoring of knowledge, attitudes, and practices. It can also check the subtle gender-differentiated changes in vulnerability and resilience. We can do this by collecting gender-disaggregated data and building gender-sensitive indicators into M&E frameworks. Gender-sensitive indicators can be quantitative, showing numerical change, such as number of women's groups participating in development of NAP roadmap. Or they can be qualitative, measuring changes in perceptions and beliefs. Gender disaggregated data is needed to raise awareness about the different roles of women and men in rural society and the unequal access to resources. In practice, there are several challenges for M&E. Let's hear from Rohini Kohli about the practical challenges related to M&E frameworks in countries.
There are no common indicators around adaptation that have been agreed in countries, for example, so it's a little hard to gauge the baseline of where countries are in terms of adaptation progress. And without this baseline, there are not many indicators either. Now, the indicators that are being selected by countries will also require means of verification, which again brings us back to the issue of information, that they will need to have proper information collection systems to be able to gauge this progress.
From what Rohini shared with us, the challenges relate to baselines, indicators for adaptation, availability and access to data, and means of verification. For example, there are no universally applicable indicators for adaptation. We need to combine multiple indicators, including sector-specific ones, because of the multifaceted nature of adaptation. What is more, it can be challenging to attribute impacts to a single adaptation intervention when impact may be due to a broader set of development actions. Take a look at the lecture notes to find out what are the other challenges, but also some of the solutions that have been discussed by our experts. We have been focusing a little bit more on the M of the M&E. Let's take a closer look at one of the preferred types of evaluations now. This type of evaluation can deliver robust and credible evidence on selecting climate change adaptation activities. These are impact evaluations. An impact evaluation looks at the changes in the well-being of individuals that can be attributed to a particular project, program, or policy. Impact evaluations aim to isolate the impact of the program or policy from other confounding factors. In other words, they try to answer cause and effect questions, such as, will this program improve well-being compared to the status quo? Or of the many ways in which adaptation to climate change can be carried out, which one is the most effective one? Or in the case of Kapitan Johnny from the Philippines, what is the impact of rice intensification programs? A good impact evaluation can take place over the course of the program, starting early in the design and implementation stages. This way, certain aspects of the program can be changed to make it better. Impact evaluations are especially useful when countries test innovative adaptation actions that seem promising in theory but have little hard evidence. Let's hear again from Rohini Kohli about the use of these evaluations. What can be some of the challenges in practice?
The monitoring and review units of the ministries will also have to use a lot of the impact related information, which will take a long time because impact is normally calibrated over a long period of time. However, they would actually on an annual or a biannual basis look at the administrative information and make conclusions about how progress is happening on the ground, but they would need to look at it also in the longer term as to what impacts after 4-5 years, what impacts can actually be said successfully from the adaptation interventions.
As usual, there is much more on M&E that you can find in our lecture notes for this week. As this is our last week, take the chance to finalize any remaining quiz attempts and make sure to upload your final peer assessment. See you in our next video.